Welcome to Collecting Chaos. It's Freeform Friday. Now, a couple weeks ago, Brett Bottomley asked, could you share your comic collecting story? Who, what, where, when, how? Do you own a shop? And that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to go through some comics. I have a little stack of comics here. And I'll go through and I'm going to take them out of the bag so I can get ready to put them in Mylar. And as I do that, I'm going to talk to you and tell you as much as I can remember of my comic collecting story. So if that's what you want to see and hear about, keep watching. My collecting story. Well, it started a long time ago. It was back in the early 60s. And, I'd been reading comics. I started reading comics around 1960 and 1961, about the same time I entered grade school. And I was in second or third grade. And like I said, I bought comics every chance I got, so I had a nice little nest egg of comics. I had 20, 30 comics. Huge number. None of my friends had that many. And I was talking to a guy a little bit older than me. He was watching me for my sister because she had gone out with her brother-in-law, or with my brother-in-law. They did later get married, obviously. And he said, you like comic books? I said, yeah, I love comics. Their comics are great, He said, well, let me show you something. He took me into his room. And he must have had every comic book in existence. I mean, to me, now I'm sure it's an exaggeration of my memory, but my memory says he had comics floor to ceiling. Obviously, that I can't believe that actually happened, but that's the way I remember it. And he said, let me show you the one I got most recently. And he showed me this one. It's an incredible comic. It was great. It had Superman on it. He's lifting up a car. I said, wow, I'd like to read that. And he went, oh no, this cost me $10. I'm not letting you touch it. And I kind of understood that. $10, that's a huge amount of money for a comic book. You remember, comic books were 10 cents at the time. They hadn't gone up to 12 cents yet. And I thought, wow, I want to collect comic books. Because that's what that was his collection. That's what he called it. And it was the first time I ever heard of comics being collected. And I was real young at the time, and it made quite an impression. So, whenever I bought a comic, I would read it and I'd put it away, and I tried to take good care of them, but, I was a kid, so obviously I didn't. We moved, the comics got tossed, I'd buy more, we'd move, the comics would get tossed, and that's just the way it was. Later on, in high school, I got together with some guys and got in with a bad crowd. They were comic book collectors. And this is the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s. And we're collecting comics. And I discovered, hey, people will trade these. You can buy newer comics and trade them for older comics. So, hey, I don't know what's going on, but here's this #1 issue, and it's supposed to be good. So I bought like 50 copies of it. Took every penny I had. And I did sell them all eventually. I traded for a couple of them, but I sold the majority of them. About 5 or 6 years later, possibly later than that. I think I was actually in the Army when I finally sold them all. Yeah, I sold them too, was pissed, but that's okay. It's a whole different story. But I had, a pretty good collection of comics there. I had pretty much every Marvel comic from 1959 on. and a lot of them going back even further than that, going back into the mid-50s, all the way through the mid-70s. You know, I had close to 20 years of Marvel comics. Most of the DC comics from the 60s I had, including full runs of Justice League, full runs of Green Lantern, all of the Superman comics that were published in there, all of the adventure comics, all of the action comics, all of the Superboy comics, the Wonder Woman comics. I had all of that stuff. And I sold them. Just before I joined the Army, I sold them. I remember the negotiation I had for Spider-Man #1. Here, I need to start working on this stuff. But I remember the negotiation I had for Spider-Man #1. And this guy wanted $15 for Spider-Man #1. An ungodly amount of money back in 1971 or 72, whichever year it was. Finally, I said, yeah, okay, if you throw this issue number 15 in with it, I'll do it. And so he did, and that's how I got Amazing Fantasy 15 and Spider-Man #1. And I paid $15 for both of them. Of course, they're long gone. I sold them in the mid-70s. I got about $90 a piece for them. Now, you're probably thinking, you idiot, you should have saved him. They'd be worth a fortune now. Yeah, well, you know, you figure out the percentage increase from $15 to $180. And compare it to anything you buy now. And the speculator market today is nothing compared to what I did there. One of my worst experiences, though, I bought a Superman #9. And I took it home, and my mom saw it. She says, "How much did you pay for it?" I said, "Quite a bit." She said, "How much?" So I told her I paid. And I think it was like $80 or $90. Oh, she was livid. "Do you know how much we could? Do you know what we could do with that money? And you wasted it on a comic book." "Mom, you don't understand. This isn't just a comic book." And oh, she was pissed. I said, "Okay, I'll tell you what, I'll sell it." She said, "Well, you're not going to get what you paid for it for. You've just thrown away your money." And I walked in. 2 days later, I walked in, and I sold the comic. "Well, how much did you lose?" "Well, I don't care if this is sealed to protect its condition. That it's like 1,000,000 years old, and I'm not keeping that plastic." So I laid 3 $100 bills on her table. I said, "There." And she went, "You bought the comic for $80 and sold it for $300? I said, "Yeah." She said, "I had no idea." And then she looked at me and she said, "I will never ever say another word about your comic books again." And she never did. She never did. So, Charlie and Flytrap. Cool stuff. So, there you go. That's that's a second printing of New Mutants #2. That's just another part of my collecting experience. Now, like I said, I sold all my comic books before I joined the Army, and then when I got out of the Army, I went right back to collecting again. So it was about a 10-year period that I didn't buy any comics. 10, maybe 12, 13 years. It was the late 80s when I started buying them again. And by then I was married. You know, wife didn't really understand what was going on, but she knew I liked them, and that was cool. And I would go to comic shows, and I'd buy sell, trade, and go to a comic shop, and people would bring in comics to sell, and the guy would say, "Oh no, the condition isn't good enough, I don't want them." And I'd look at them and, "Is it okay if I make an offer?" I'd ask the owner of the store if it was okay if I made an offer, and he'd say yes, and so I'd offer the person some money, and I'd take home a big stack of Silver Age in mid to low grade condition. Many of them I still have. And he was okay with it. So it got to the point where I had so many comics, I couldn't take them all to a show at one time. You know, I'd go buy and sell at shows. I'd have too many comics. I'd have to pick and choose what I was going to take to a show. So my wife asked me one day, what do you want to do? I said, I'd like to open up a store. I'd like to open up my own store. So we did. In San Jose, California, and we opened a store. We were open from 1994 to about 2001. And then I shut down, not because I didn't have the business, but because my landlord pretty much doubled my rent, and I had just started making a profit. And there was no way I was going to go through that again, trying to build the business back up to where I could actually afford it. So that's when I shut down. And I've been buying off and on ever since and not selling anything, or very little. I've only sold, it's only been the past year that I've sold any comics, really. But I do intend on getting back into the buying and selling, and, well, into the selling. I've never stopped buying. And, yeah, so I don't own a store anymore. I've collected more or less my whole life, one thing or the other. I've got, at one time I had a huge Playboy collection. I still have a lot of them. I don't have all of them. A lot of them were ruined in a flood. I had a fairly large movie poster collection. That was destroyed in the flood. Yeah. I've lost things. I had a pretty good sized record collection that was in storage, and somebody was supposed to be paying the storage for me, and I'd send them money every month, and they weren't paying it, and I lost it all. So, yeah. Different things happened to me. But I have been collecting comics pretty much since I was 7 years old, so about 60 years. And I've been buying and selling since I was about 16 or 17, so about 50 years. And I've been grading comics for 50 years. And the people that have, that seen me grade, they trust me, and they trust my judgment on them. But let's go back to the beginning again. Remember I told you about that comic book that one guy showed me? It wasn't until many years later, matter of fact it was about 5 years ago, that I was thinking back, and I had a vision of that comic. I could see it just as clear as if it was in front of me, and that was the first time I ever laid my eyes on Action Comics #1. There was a convention in Washington, D.C., a Metro Comic Con put on by Gary Groth, that I saw a copy of, the first time I saw a copy of Action 1 for sale. And I got one at like $400 or $500, and I had the money in my pocket, but it didn't pull the trigger. Now, about a month before that, I was at a friend of mine's house. He was an older gentleman compared to what I was. I was in my early 20s. He was older. We'll call him Joe. And he said, "Did you watch The Late Show last night?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, a guy went on there and he said there was only," he was talking about Action Comics #1, and he said there's only, 5 copies known to exist, or 7, maybe it was 7. No, I think he said 7 copies known to exist. And I thought, really? That's all there is? He went, "No, that guy doesn't know what he's talking about." So what do you mean? And he started naming people, collectors, big-time collectors, that he knew for a fact had the comic. And as he's going through the name, he gets up and he walks over to a cabinet and he opens it up and he gets to 8. Then he names a 9th person that he knows for a fact owns this comic. And then he pulls 2 comics out of his cabinet and fans them out and here's my 2. Like it's nothing, you know. Like when I take comics from the 60s or from the 70s or 80s and say, and of course I have 2 copies or 3 copies, you know, and it was nothing to him. And it was about a month later I had my first chance of buying one. So that, with 9, and he had 2, that's 11, and the one that I was considering buying makes 12. Obviously the guy that was on the TV didn't know what he was talking about. So, there you go. The Sensational Satan Brothers. I'm pretty sure I read this before, but I don't remember. So, I've had, since then, 3 other opportunities to buy Action Comics #1, and every time I passed it up, even though I had the money. The 4th time, or the 5th time, yeah, the last time, I told the guy, well, let me go home and I'll talk to my wife and we'll see what she says. And on the way home, I talked myself out of it. So I never mentioned it to my wife. Well, about 8 or 9 years ago, my wife and I were talking about comics, and she said, did you ever get a chance to buy the first Superman? I said, you mean Action 1? She said, yeah. I said, several times, but I never did it because I always thought it was too expensive. She said, well, when was the last time? I said, the last time the guy wanted about $10,000 for it, and, or no, it was more than that. The guy wanted like $60,000, $70,000 for it. We'd have to take out another mortgage on the house in order to pay for it. And she looked at me with this perfectly straight face and said, why didn't you? Why didn't you? I told her the truth. I didn't think you'd want me to. She said, no, that's your dream, to own the first Superman. Well, actually it isn't. My dream is to own the first Superman comic, not the first Action comic. And to this day, I have never seen, in person, a copy of Superman #1. Just one of those comics that's eluded me. I know they're there. I know they're around. I've seen pictures of them. I know people that have had it and that do have it. But I've never actually laid my eyes on one. There's so much that I could say and talk about over the last 60 years, but I can't put it all in one video. I'm not going to try to put it all in one video, but that's a kind of a summary of where my life is, how it's been as far as comics go. And I seem to just walk into good deals occasionally. I used to say, you know, everything passes through my hands eventually. In fact, let me show you what I picked up the other day for, I'm thinking it cost me about 30 cents. I'll be right back. Now you see, when I say everything passes through my hands eventually, this is not a particularly rare comic. But I paid about 30 cents for it. And I pressed it. Didn't have to clean it, but I pressed it because, you know, it wasn't as smooth as I would have liked it. And it's a newsstand copy of the West Coast Avengers. A lot of people have that, right? this just isn't any newsstand copy of the West Coast Avengers. This is a Mark Jewelers variant newsstand copy of the West Coast Avengers 45. And I'll probably sell it. In its current condition, I consider it to be fine to very fine. Put it in Mylar to protect it. And I expect to get a whole lot more than 30 cents for it. But yeah, things just, somehow things come to me. And when I saw it, I thought, oh, cool, you know, maybe somebody will give me 50 bucks for it. And then I saw it was the Mark Jewelers variant. And I went, oh, cool, somebody's going to give me a whole lot more than 50 bucks for it, or I won't sell it. But I might throw it up on an auction and start the bidding low. You never know what I'm going to do. But I love comics, and they're a big part of my life. Currently I have 40 short boxes full of comics in Mylar, in the Mylite 2s. Outsiders #1. 3 copies. Here's a couple of Planet Hulks. I think they're both Planet Hulks. Yep. Planet Hulk 2 and 3. I don't know what the big deal about that is. Did you know that Mark Teixeira did work for DC? Yeah, he did this cover, in fact. Power Lords. Artist, Mark Teixeira. And this is some of his early work, and you can tell it's still gorgeous. Well, I think that's going to be about it. I hope I didn't bore you too much. I would like to open another store one day. That's one of my long-term goals. When I retire and decide I don't want to work for somebody else ever again, I hope to open another store. And this time make it last. I don't know if I'll carry new comics or not, but I'll definitely carry old ones. So, something for you to remember. Wash your hands before you handle your comics. It's good for your comics. It's good for your health. And we'll see you next video. Bye.